Okay, Jillian, Jonathan, welcome back. I'm going to talk to you about what happened in Yugoslavia during the latter part of the George H.W. Bush administration and then the first part of the Bill Clinton presidency. With the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe in 1989 and 1990, the hold of the Communist Party over the nation of Yugoslavia, which is all these countries that are colored on this map, once were one country called Yugoslavia with its capital at Belgrade there. It was a communist federal republic made up of different ethnic republics. So the Serbs, for example, in Serbia were a republic of Yugoslavia. The Montenegrins, the people of Bosnia-Herzegovina were a republic. The Croatians were a republic. The Slovenians were a republic. And the Macedonians down here were a republic of the country Yugoslavia, the land of the South Slavs in the Serbo-Croatian language, Yugoslavia. Pardon. But with the collapse of the communist authority in Eastern Europe, the Communist Party of Yugoslavia also began to lose its grip. Their longtime leader from the end of World War II, during World War II and following, died a year before. And without his charismatic national leadership, Yugoslavia teetered and then disintegrated, and the Communist Party lost its hold on power in many of these republics in 1990. But with the fall of centralized power, old ethnic animosities came back in Yugoslavia. The Serbian people really dominated Yugoslavia. They were the most numerous ethnic group. The capital was Belgrade, the capital of Serbia. And many other people in Yugoslavia resented the power that the Serbs had exercised in Yugoslavia. But the Croats here had a long-standing enmity with the Serbs. Now, Croatia and Serbia share the same language. They are ethnically, in many, many ways, the same people. They have the same language, and they trace their ancestry back to the same stock in the distant past. And yet they are different ethnic groups. And in 1990, this ethnic division grew into violent hatred on the part of many. And one of the things that can lead people who are very similar in other ways to hate each other enough to kill each other is, unfortunately, religion. Serbians are overwhelmingly Eastern Orthodox Christians. Croatians are overwhelmingly Roman Catholic Christians. They're both Christian countries, but unfortunately that doesn't stop them from hating and killing each other. One of the reasons the Serbs hated the Croats so much is that while the Serbs tend to look to Moscow as their mentor, their big brother, look to Russia as their big brother, the Croats had tended to look to Germany as their big brother. Southern Germany is Roman Catholic, like Croatia. Austria is Roman Catholic and German-speaking. So the Croats, when the Germans invaded Yugoslavia in 1939, many Croats welcomed them with open arms. Croatian troops even took part in the invasion of Russia alongside the Nazis and the Italians and the Romanians and the Hungarians. There were even Croatian SS units during World War II. And many times those Croats were used to fight against Serbian resistance fighters during World War II. And many Serbs still, 45 years later, hated the Croats for collaboration with the Nazis. Those, you might think, 45 years, give it up. Well, things don't work that way in the Balkans. Meanwhile, Bosnia-Herzegovina here is a big problem. While it was a separate republic, it is not more or less ethnically pure like Serbia and Croatia. It's a very mixed bag of peoples. Each mountain valley has a different ethnicity in it. About 40% of Bosnians are Muslim. About 30% of Bosnians are Serbian. And about 30% of them are Croatian ethnically. Yet they're all in this one republic. And a lot of the Christian Yugoslavs still harbored resentments from 100+ years ago against the Muslim Bosnians. Yeah. So they would break out into a vicious civil war. Slovenia in the north, again, an ethnically pure, one ethnicity essentially there. It's all in the Alps. It's the high ground. Because it's the high ground, and only a few highways you could get into to Slovenia from the south end, they were able to block those highways, and nobody dared to attack them when Yugoslavia fell apart. So they got their freedom, their independence, practically without a scratch. And they also were close to Austria. They were welcomed into the European family much more easily than anybody else, in part because they didn't have fighting. They didn't have ethnic hatreds resulting in war crimes and things there. So it was easy on the Slovenes, in part because of their good luck of being a mountain people. And they always take the high ground. They had the high ground. You couldn't attack them. This area down here in the south, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, it would declare its independence. There was not major fighting down there. Their problem was actually with the Greeks to the south. The Greeks refused to recognize their independence because they used the name Macedonia. And Macedonia, ancient Alexander the Great, the Greeks claimed to own the name Macedonia, and they would have no business with these Serbian type people, these Slav type people who claimed to be Macedonian. So they wouldn't recognize their independence, and they wouldn't let the rest of the world do it. So that's why for many years it was listed as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. They weren't FYROM, former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, for 25 years. Finally, just a few years ago, the Greeks allowed to let them call themselves North Macedonia. North Macedonia. But in any event, late in 1990, communism has fallen apart. The different ethnic republics are getting their own independent-minded leadership, although they hadn't declared independence yet. But the ethnic hatreds are getting stirred up. I remember vividly in September, or about September of 1990, I was reading the New York Times, and they had a little story that seemed to be not terribly important. It was out of Belgrade, the capital of Serbia, and it said the Belgrade City Council had decided to refuse permission for Bosnian Muslims and Croats to be buried in the city cemetery, only reserving it for Serbs. And I remember saying to a friend of mine when I read that article, you watch, there'll be a bloody war here within 6 months. Because when you can't bury Granny next to somebody else, you hate them with a passion. And that sadly proved to be very true. In the very end of 1991, the beginning of 1992, Croatia declared its independence, Slovenia declared its independence, and the Serbs, who dominated Yugoslavia, tried to use their army to force the Croats to rejoin Yugoslavia. But the Croats got a pretty good chunk of the officer corps of the old Yugoslav army and a pretty good number of weapons, and they were able to fight to a standstill and even push back the Serbian army. It technically was the Yugoslav army. It was really the Serbians. And after about a year, they reached a ceasefire and then eventually a peace accord that recognized Croatian independence. But unfortunately, along the way, there was a great deal of violence, and something else came into the world's vocabulary. For one thing, the Serbs began rounding up Croatians in places and locking them up in concentration camps just like the Nazis in World War II. People had thought Europe was beyond this, but it wasn't. But even more than that, a term entered worldwide parlance: ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing. The idea that we're going to purify a land of everybody who's not of the right ethnicity. Lock them up in concentration camps, then expel them. Or, unfortunately, it happened in several places, massacre them. So the old Yugoslav civil war, it became known as the Balkan War, because it's in the Balkans, became a bloody mess. Nowhere was it worse than in Bosnia-Herzegovina, because you had, as I said, ethnic groups separated by a ridge of hills, villages a mile apart of different ethnicities, willing to kill each other because of their ethnic differences, both struggling for power inside Bosnia or to break off their region. The Serbs in Bosnia, many of them wanted to join Serbia. And especially the Bosnian Serbs, supported by elements of the Serbian actual army, these Bosnian Serbs became notorious for horrible war crimes. The city of Srebrenica, there's a Bosnian Muslim town. The Bosnian Serbs came in, rounded up every man and boy in town, locked all the women and girls up in a mosque, attacked the women and girls. I won't go into details, but you can probably guess it was not at all good. But outside of town, they machine gunned every man and boy in the community. Thousands of bodies were found when the war was over. They just killed them in cold blood out in the forest and buried them with bulldozers. That was the most extreme example of ethnic cleansing. But they were trying to create a pure Serbian region, free from every non-Serb. And if you wouldn't leave voluntarily, they'd come in and kick you out, or they'd murder you. And the Bosnian Serbs were the worst at this, although there were some atrocities by Bosnian Croats and Muslims as well. And this went on for 9 years. Finally, the Dayton Peace Accords were reached that gave a peace in Bosnia. What they did is they created a 3-member board to run Bosnia-Herzegovina. 1 Croat, 1 Serb, 1 Muslim, but the Muslim would always be president because they did have the largest number of the 3 groups. But really, Bosnia's never thrived. The regions don't get along. They don't cooperate. It's a tiny country divided by mountains where people who live 5 miles apart won't even talk to each other. So they have survived pretty much with foreign aid now for decades. Late in the 90s, when Bill Clinton was president, this area here will become an issue. It's called Kosovo. And it's an ethnic Muslim enclave. The people there are actually Albanians ethnically, most of them. Its capital is at Pristina. But as you see, it's orange on this map because it was part of Serbia. But people in Kosovo, the Kosovo Liberation Army, rose up to fight against the Serbs, demanding their freedom, their independence, because they were ethnic Albanians and felt they had been long abused by the Serbs. The Serbs fought back brutally. The world decided the Serbs were the worst of the bad guys, and the United States and our NATO allies actually intervened to help the Kosovars. We sent troops in to establish a peacekeeping force to guarantee the Serbs couldn't do anything to them. We attacked Serbia with planes to get them to stop attacking the Kosovars. And the United States and European Union, and the many other countries around the world recognize Kosovo as an independent country today. Serbia and Russia do not, which I guess is why this book left it as orange. The Russians always backed the Serbs. Remember World War I, Pan-Slavism? The Russians backed the Serbs, caused World War I, right? Still the same way. The Russians still back the Serbs, whatever. And they have stood in the way, really, of Kosovo getting its total freedom and full prosperity. But anyway, after the year 2000, there has been peace in the Balkans. So they've had 20 years of peace. The Croats, the Slovenes have really prospered. The Serbs, kinda. Bosnia, not so much. Kosovo's got a long way to go. Finally, the Greeks let the North Macedonians have their full measure of independence, and so they're slowly improving there too. But that's the sad and tragic story. Massacres, concentration camps, ethnic hatreds. People had thought Europe was beyond this after the First World War and the Second World War, but the 1990s proved that wasn't true. We'll move on to happier material next time, but there's your lectures for Wednesday. God bless.